Hello, it's a big pleasure to talk about a major course in our university, which is the Federal University of Parana, known as UFPR, in the city of Curitiba, southern Brazil. And we are talking about the Loteria graduation. That means that our students are prepared to work as craftsmen, to build, to repair, to restore, to evaluate musical instruments, essentially made of wood. So, Loteria, that's the Brazilian word to talk about the profession of building and of course restoring a musical instrument. This comes from the French word luthier. Luthier, it's the person that used to build the instruments. But of course, let's talk about etymology of luthier. It comes from luth, and luth is the name of the al'oud. Al'oud would be the luth, the medieval instrument that comes from the Midwestern countries and arrived in Europe and generally through the Peninsula Iberica, and they become instruments that are very tied to the European culture through all the Middle Ages. And from luth, luthier, Loteria. So if we walk around our classroom, we'll see some different things. Regular benches or regular chairs and tables. We have benches where we can prepare our instruments. So even with the theoretical classes that we have, normally we are going to use benches because wood is all the time part of our classes. And of course, we'll see, this is a multi-purpose class. We have some products that just arrived. For instance, alcohol used to work on chemistry, which is to prepare our varnishes and our glues made to prepare those instruments. We also teach our students how to maintain wood in a good shape, because we of course want that the instruments that we'll build last for 100, 200, who knows, a millennia. We won't be here to know that. Now let's walk around here in the sector of professional education of the University of Parana. Now walking here around, we have the lockers from the students. This is the machinery where we can have the biggest work of cutting bigger pieces of wood and things like that. And of course, we need to pay a lot of attention on the security that we use here. So this is our machinery room. We can get in and have a look at it. In our wall, sometimes the exhibition of traditional instruments. Don't worry, we don't use that to cut wood here, but it's always interesting to show the students. Traditional instruments were built, of course, this one is to cut trees, it's not to build instruments, but those other ones are used to build instruments. So the students can understand traditional instruments that are 200, 300 years old were built with those traditional instruments. This is a way to understand and respect the old masters. So even today, with all the modern machinery that we can have, it's still difficult to build instruments. So imagine at that time that they only had very traditional machinery, or not even machinery, traditional tools. So there's also, it's a reverence we make to the old masters, and that's why we put there, even though we don't use them anymore. Let's go to the other room now. We are going to the room where students are working. So I will be more quiet, not to distract them, but for instance, we can have a look at here. They are working in what we call the roseta. They are building a very traditional instrument called cavaquinho. This instrument was an heritage that it comes from the Portuguese, which is called cavaquinho, also cavaquinho minhoto. It's come from the part of Minho in Portugal, and that's what they are building. And if you look at here, They are doing this round part. That's the things that all the students are doing in the classes of those 2 last weeks. Excuse me, Samuel. This is a Rosetta built from IP. And he built some geometrical forms, and this will be exactly in this part of the instrument. This is the body of cavaquinho, and this will be exactly here. This assignment that they needed to build this week was difficult because the idea that they could go beyond just traditional design, and each student needed to create his design. Samuel, for instance, built small trapezes that he glued together to make that. Good job.
Thank you.
Let me show, for instance, there, he's preparing his cavaquinho from a piece of wood. He's going to cut, and all the instruments are based on plans that the professors gave them. They need to follow exactly the same measures because this class right now, they're not supposed to be too much inventive. They can work in some details that they can invent, but the rest of it, they need to really understand how to build very traditional ways. Next year, they'll have other signatures that they'll be able to build their own ideas. Thank you, Sama.
Thank you.
Whenever we work with tools, to teach how to build instruments is also to teach how to use those tools. So those big models are exactly, for instance, how to use paquímetro in English. I don't know how to say it, but it's just to measure the size of wood parts of in between them. And so we have a lot of tools that are built like that, so we can show to the students, to the whole class, how to work with it. One of the professors is working with restoration. For instance, this happens quite a lot during this course of luteria. This is a professor from the university that brought this instrument, which is an old cavaquinho, and said it was in really bad shape. It was painted with bad paints, and it had problems. It was broken someplace, so they brought it here so we could restore it and bring a new shape. So it's always a good moment to learn how to work with those instruments. As I was explaining, this is not quite a regular university class, and so in order to each student to be able to work, they need to have a drawer. Each drawer has main tools. For instance, we have Swiss tools, very good quality tools, and for Brazilian standards, they're extremely expensive. So in order to be able to use those tools and those drawers, each student bring its idea and he let it here so he can take a drawer to his bench and be able to use it. So those are these. And of course we have some fun. For everything we need to invent, we always use wood for pretty much everything. So those are mostly some of the professor tools, but the idea is every student has its own bench. For instance, he's working on, on his cavaquinho, and every student is in a different part of the building of its instrument. And we can have around here, she's doing her Rosetta, she's inventing the shape. In this instrument is pretty much the only thing that they can invent. The rest of the instruments need to be absolutely inside the patterns. This is a bench of one of the professors, Leandro, that we are going to meet tomorrow. And it's just to show that, of course, the professors also have their space to work while the students are doing their assignments. So that's important. So the students, they can see also the professors working in real situation, building instruments and all those kinds of things. Those are tools that are more common, so they are freely to use as long as they put back in place. We used to have 2 different rooms, and now we put all of them together because, of course, this is a beginner's class, So we have lots of students, more than in the other classes. But it's interesting to understand, it was good for beginners to see other students doing the same tasks. They help each other. So it's a kind of peer learning because they are able to see their friends. So instead of a closed space, we open it. So we can have a look at here. Students do other things. Preparing the reinforcement from the cavaquinho. This part here. So they'll be able to glue the top of the instrument. And here we have a small display of the different stages of the instrument. So the students can have a look at every time. And just, even though they all have this plan in their material, they just have a look at here and understand the different stages of building the instrument. So it's a visual help. This is something interesting to show. This is just a frame to build the inner part of the cavaquinho. But something very interesting that he really prepared the outside of it. It's to understand that this frame is going to be possible, it's going to be used to build other instruments. So even though it's not the instrument itself, it's interesting to build it with a certain carefulness. So that's very nice. And we see that every student is going to build their own way of preparing that. Obrigado. See? And here we have another rosetta. This is cutting, almost ready. And this is his own pattern that he's created. And that he's going to prepare his instruments. Obrigadão. Okay, now we can show upstairs here. Those are not instruments built from the students, but those are instruments that arrive here somehow. Normal instruments to be restored, instruments that are found sometimes even in the garbage, but we understand that every instrument has a potential of helping to form new luthier. So that's something important. Even though some of these instruments may be quite simple or may be in a very bad shape, they can be very helpful in the formation of new luthiers. And that means that we never give up any piece of wood that can be potentially important to build instruments and of course to make music.